That's better. Hey guys, welcome to my review for Ari Aster's new film, Eddington. Now, I've only seen one of Ari Aster's previous films, and that was Hereditary, which I really did enjoy. I was more apprehensive about this one because I know that it takes place during COVID, so you know it's going to be full of cringe dialogue and rhetoric. And boy, was I right. Let's get into it. In May of 2020, during the worst days of the COVID pandemic, a small-town sheriff finds himself at odds with the local mayor over protocols. A powder keg is sparked when social justice protests come to town, and the sheriff's personal life falls apart. Pandemonium descends upon the small town of Eddington, New Mexico.
Rated R.
Now, full disclosure, I am what some people will consider more left-leaning. You know, freedom, equality, human rights, that kind of stuff. That should be pretty evident if you've seen my previous content. But you also know that I am fair and honest when it comes to how I view movies. So let's have a real conversation about Eddington. No shills allowed. Joaquin Phoenix plays Sheriff Joe Cross, one of only 3 officers in this entire town. Sheriff Cross is an odd character. He's sometimes aloof, he's inept, and he's very unhappy in his personal life. His wife is disinterested in him, and his mother-in-law, who lives with him, is obsessed with right-wing conspiracies. Cross doesn't really believe in the state-mandated COVID restrictions because there haven't been any cases in their town. He's not adamantly against them, he just doesn't make any effort to enforce them. Joaquin gives a good performance as usual, but it isn't a new role for him. He's played this type of character before. There were a few times where he mumbled his lines, and that was unfortunate. Pedro Pascal plays Mayor Ted Garcia, the current mayor who is also up for re-election. Pedro isn't in the movie as much as the trailer would lead you to think. Mayor Garcia is actually a pretty congenial character. Obviously, he's trying to get re-elected, so he's doing his best to not step on anybody's toes. He calmly tries to get people to adhere to the COVID restrictions. Pedro Pascal does a fine job with the role, but honestly, he felt underutilized. Now, these two characters are supposed to be arch rivals. If you've watched the trailer, it is framed in that way. And honestly, their relationship seemed more benign than anything else. Sure, they have their disagreements, and it's obvious they don't like each other, but there's nothing explosive about that. It feels more passive-aggressive than anything else. The audience is slowly drip-fed information about their history, and I think that could have been sped up a little bit. But things never really reached that volcanic summit. Deidre O'Connell plays Dawn, mother to Luis and mother-in-law to Sheriff Cross. Honestly, I found this character to be pretty bizarre. For about 90% of the film, Dawn just spouts off right-wing talking points and conspiracy theories completely unprovoked. I assume it's to show how easily some people are radicalized and manipulated by propaganda. She was anti-vaccine, anti-Semitic, racist, just pure red pill, do your own research type of person. It was really one note. Austin Butler plays Vernon, who we don't actually know much about. He's some kind of influencer, new age cult leader type of character. He's just there to give a couple monologues and then he's gone. It was a complete waste of a character. And finally, we have Emma Stone, who plays Louise Cross, wife to Sheriff Cross and daughter to Dawn. Our introduction to Louise is a weak one. She's pretty much mute for most of the film. Her character history is mostly hinted at, but then retconned halfway through the movie. Emma Stone wasn't given much to work with, and again, a wasted character. The movie opens in May 2020, where the country is struggling to make sense of the COVID pandemic. Tens of thousands of people are getting sick and dying, and restrictions are being put into place. There's also the murder of George Floyd, which ignites the country in protest. I mentioned earlier my concerns with how the COVID drama was going to be framed. As someone who worked with the public through the entire declared pandemic, I've had my fill of grown adults complaining. The sheer amount of petulant fits thrown by fully grown adults was insane. Crying about having to wear a mask, or crying about people not wearing a mask. Complaining about having to stand 6 feet apart, or complaining that people aren't standing 6 feet apart. It was a truly awful time, and I don't think our country has healed from it. Surprisingly, this wasn't featured as prominently as I was expecting. There is a boomer crash out though at a grocery store, and the sheriff does support it. But this speaks more to the kind of person that the sheriff is. He's more of a passive butthead about not honoring store policies on private property. Once he gets a little praise for not enforcing these restrictions, he runs with it like a narcissist. Sound familiar? He then becomes a beacon for the naysayers and announces his run for mayor. And it's not because he actually cares, it's for selfish reasons. Again, all very familiar to the leadership of that time. There's also mention of a data processing plant deal that Mayor Garcia is negotiating. Some townsfolk are against it, and for good reason. These plants consume massive amounts of energy and water and pollute the environment. But after the initial mentioning of this deal, it's pretty much left out of the entire plot for the rest of the movie. I thought this was an odd choice by Ari Aster, considering how these plants are currently running amok in America. And that's the thing about Eddington. Writer and director Ari Aster was very selective about what he wanted to highlight and what he wanted to leave behind. Now, I can't say if any of this was intentional or not. Maybe some things were cut for pacing or time. The movie is 2 hours and 28 minutes, and the first half does feel really slow. But there's some framing of characters that seem to have a slant. For example, I mentioned how Dawn only speaks in propaganda, but she's not scolded for this. She's encouraged sometimes, and most of the time just ignored. Then you have the Black Lives Matter protesters. These people are framed in the most negative light, more than anyone else in the film. Even the murderers. They are framed as self-flagellating white people who are so burdened by their own white guilt. They are these bleeding heart neoliberals, the perfect stereotype that Fox News complains about daily, saying things like, "I'm sorry for my whiteness and my privilege, and I know that my voice is the one that's being elevated right now, and it shouldn't be because it's white, and it's your voice that should be elevated because you're a person of color, and a beautiful color at that, and you're more important than I will ever be because I'm white." And I am dead serious. That's how these protesters are portrayed in the movie. It is bat poop crazy. Now, before you think I'm offended, I am not offended. Because I've actually met people like this. They do exist. But the problem is that this is the characterization of all of the protesters. None of them diverge from this. As someone who went to small town Black Lives Matter protests, I can guarantee you this is not the dialogue that is occurring at them. This bastardization of actual protests is a right-wing wet dream. It's actually kind of painful to watch because you know there are people who are watching this movie and completely agreeing with all of it. Thankfully, halfway through, the movie shifts to a more interesting phase. The small town stuff was fine, but the exaggerations made it really drag. The second half descends completely into madness. And I found that to be much more enjoyable. There were multiple concurrent police investigations that I found really interesting. I like how they all intertwined. There were layers to it. Plus, this is when Joaquin Phoenix really came into his own and upped the ante. It became more unhinged as it went on, and I think that worked. However, it wasn't without flaws. I won't spoil anything, but a new group of people are introduced without any background. They are quite violent. It was just weird because initially we were led to believe they were from a certain ideology. But reality has taught us that certain opportunists seize upon civil unrest for their own benefit. And we never find out about their affiliations, motives, identities, nothing. Maybe it's up to the viewer to make up their mind. Or Ari Aster chickened out. Look, I get the whole thing is satire, okay? I get it. But in my opinion, it's not super effective when it's this lopsided. Just the fact of how much right-wing propaganda is being pumped into this movie with no reaction from the characters at all. It just becomes part of the background noise. Literally. Characters will be having breakfast and they'll hear about weaponized vaccines and space lasers, and they don't care. The people who are complaining about wearing a mask are treated as victims, and the people who are just following the rules are reprimanded. Plus, there isn't a single protester with common sense. They're all mindless woke drones regurgitating neoliberal talking points. But perhaps this was a juxtaposition to how conservatives are often shown in media, being mindless drones regurgitating Fox News fascist talking points. That would be a very interesting angle if that is the case, but the film makes no indication of that. And finally, I have to talk about the one glaring omission from the film, and that is the Mango Mussolini, the Cheeto dust turd, the bloated Führer himself, Donald J. Trump. Obviously, I'm not a fan of his, because I believe in those little things, like the US Constitution, checks and balances, all that. But the fact that he isn't mentioned in the whole film is rather crazy. He's a propagator of most of these conspiracy theories and misinformation. Plus, he was the sitting president at the time. And none of the characters mention this? There were references to red hats, and we see a single picture of Trump as a character scrolls through their phone, but that's it. And I'm not saying that Ari Aster had to frame Trump in any negative light. You know, you want to be fair about these type of things. Just simply play audio and video of him talking. That's it. Just show the real stuff, like when he talked about injecting bleach or shooting UV rays into your body. It would speak for itself to just have these documented speeches included, because there's nothing more potent than the reality of his leadership. It felt like another cop-out from Ari Aster. On a more technical side, I do think the movie looked really good. I enjoyed the visuals and the shot compositions. There was also this focus on technology throughout the film. We see tons of people recording themselves and others. And there's some fun transition shots from in-the-moment recording to somebody else watching that recording at home. I felt like it was a smart way of showing our reliance on technology and social media. It also shows how dangerous it can be. Everyone is an influencer these days. But some of us don't have enough subscribers and followers to get our messages across. The soundtrack was fitting as well. There were these musical stabs that felt like callbacks to classic films like Hitchcock. Characters would be having an uncomfortable or confrontational conversation, and then there would be these seemingly random juts of horns or strings. At first I found that kind of distracting, but then I realized it was adding an extra layer of tension to these scenes. Because they would be having these conversations, and then they would continue to talk a little bit more, and it was a really cool way of adding some more uneasiness to the film. The finale of the film was good. There was some shock value, but there was also some unfinished plot points. Some characters just disappeared completely. I left with more questions than answers. And it wasn't in a contemplative way. It was more like, what happened to that person? Or, did they ever finish that investigation? Kind of way. In conclusion, Eddington was a messy vision. I get the satirical take on COVID, protests, corruption, and propaganda. The movie really hammers in the theme of how easily people can be radicalized by misinformation. But it was too one-sided for me. Plus, COVID was only 5 years ago, and frankly, I don't need to relive it anytime soon. When the film works, it really works. And when it doesn't, it doesn't. And that is why I'm giving Ari Aster's new film, Eddington, the propagandized score of 6.5 out of 10. Now, depending on your personal beliefs, you may feel differently, but that would just mean you've been radicalized by propaganda. I mean, some people think that the vaccines have a special type of protein in them that activates in the sun that'll clog your veins and cause a heart attack. And other people are willing to sell their firstborn white child as reparations for slavery. But what about you? What did you think about the movie Eddington? If there's one thing that we can all agree on, is that this is going to be quite a polarizing film. So hop in the comments down below and let me know what you thought about it. But remember, keep those comments 6 feet apart. And please like and subscribe for more honest movie reviews just like this. Now, if you don't mind, I gotta go to the grocery store and try to get some toilet paper. Alright? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.